Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ron Sanders. I'm Staff Director for the Florida Center for Cybersecurity, also known as Cyber Florida. And I want to welcome you to today's webinar on the path to CMMC. At the risk of stating the obvious, CMMC stands for DoD's Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Standards. And as you'll note from the slide, today is an introduction. So we're not going to answer all your questions today, but hopefully we'll at least help you start framing what some of those questions need to be. And there are a number of follow-on activities sponsored by Cyber Florida, Florida's Department of Economic Opportunity, AFCEA, and others that we'll talk about at the end of the program. So again, let me welcome you. Before we go any further, let me introduce Kate Whitaker. Kate, say hello.
Hi, everybody.
Kate is Cyber Florida's Director of Communications and Outreach. So if you hear that disembodied voice periodically, particularly when we get to the Q&A section, don't be scared. Kate doesn't bite. She and I will help moderate the program as we go through. And we do have a full 2 hours. However, we've learned from experience that it's helpful to take a break in the middle. So there'll be about a 10-minute period where you can run off and get some lunch and take a bio break and do whatever you need to do before we reconvene. Let me just say a word about today's subject, the CMMC. I know it's daunting for many of you, especially the smaller DoD contractors that are out there. This is not just more paperwork, although it involves a fair amount of paperwork, but it's not just more bureaucracy. Our experience over the years has shown that cyber spies and cyber criminals get to larger organizations through their subcontractors. It's an easy and familiar, a well-worn attack vector. So DoD is vulnerable if you're vulnerable. And CMMC is designed to help mitigate your vulnerability risk so that the department's vulnerability risk is mitigated as well. Sort of a weak link in the chain theory. So this is worth the paperwork. It's a daunting prospect, but it's worth every minute you spend on it, and we're going to spend 2 hours today talking about it. So let me give you a brief overview of today's program. Next slide, please, Kate.
Sorry, technical difficulties.
All right, let me do that verbally. That you've missed the slide with my picture, so you haven't missed much. A second slide gives you the overview of today's program. There you see my mug, so I'll take requests for autographs separately. Here's today's program, 2 parts. Part 1 is a dialogue between 2 key players, one national, both national, in the CMMC scheme. Obviously, Mike McConnell, who is my boss, the Executive Director of Cyber Florida, but many of you probably know Mike from his previous lives. Vice Chair Booz Allen Hamilton, former Director of National Intelligence, former head of the National Security Agency. I worked for him in a couple of those capacities, so I'll accept your cards in letters of sympathy. Seriously, Mike's got a lot of things to say about this, and he spent a lot of years worrying about the cybersecurity threat. So we're privileged to have Mike join us. He is joining by voice only. He's got some bandwidth challenges this morning, so he'll be voice only. We do have Ty Scheiber. Ty has a long and distinguished career in cybersecurity. He's been involved in organizations, small, medium, and large, in both public and private sectors. And he made the mistake of leaving the room, and DoD volunteered him to be the chair of the advisory board for CMMC. It's a nonprofit. He'll tell you more about it during his remarks, but he is the driving force behind getting these standards implemented. Again, a daunting prospect. Our first part is a dialogue between Mike and Ty. They'll go for about 30 or 40 minutes. There will be time for a Q&A from the audience. So I'll remind you to look for the questions tab on your screen and submit your questions that way. You will be muted throughout the program. So submit your questions through that chat app as part of the webinar package. That's part 1, as I said, 30 or 40 minutes, then 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A, a 10-minute break in between, then we'll go to part 2. And we have the illustrious and esteemed Ms. Terry Roberts, who is CEO of something called Whitehawk. She'll tell you more about Whitehawk when we get to that part of the program. But she too has a long and distinguished career in public and private sectors. As Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, she also had the privilege / misfortune of being Mike McConnell's executive officer in a previous life. So she's former Navy. Please don't hold that against her. She's got a great sense of humor, and we're looking forward to her moderating a panel of our Cmmc experts. So more to come on that. I'll let Terry introduce them when we get to part 2 of the program. As with part 1, about 30-40 minutes of dialogue, and then the last 10 or 15 minutes Q&A from you. So again, submit your questions through that tab on the screen, and then I'll make a few closing remarks, and then we'll be done at approximately 2:15 to 2:30. So without further ado, let's go to part 1. And I've already introduced Executive Director McConnell. He makes me call him honorable, but it's an honorific he deserves because he was a cabinet level appointee. Now Executive Director of Florida, and Ty Scheiber. Ty and Mike, welcome. Mike, I know you'd like to make a few opening remarks, so let me turn it over to you and have at it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, Ron. I appreciate you all setting this up, and should be a good opportunity for exchange back and forth. What I'd like to draw on is my previous experience, mostly in the classified world. I was a naval intelligence officer for about 30 years. The last assignment was the director of the National Security Agency. Then to the private sector, I went back to be the director of national intelligence for a couple of years, and the last couple of years of the Bush administration, a little overlap with the Obama administration. The reason I chose to go back, because it was a significant change. I was in the private sector building an estate, and so going back was a consideration for my family. But the main reason I went back was, one, the president asked, but two, I thought maybe I could get cybersecurity back on the national agenda. So I've been worried about this, focused on it since my early days as a new director of the National Security Agency way back in 1992. Everybody knows NSA has 2 basic missions: break code, read the communications of potential adversaries, so you get insight with regard to their capabilities and intentions and so on. And that's what NSA is mostly known for. But NSA has another mission called make code, and make code is to protect the sensitive information of the United States, classified and sensitive, from adversaries having the same ability to exploit our communications the way NSA exploits the communications of potential adversaries. One of the tasks in the make code side is to protect the integrity of the nuclear command and control system. So it's a daunting responsibility, but mostly in the Cold War days, if you did it by the book, based on the way communications were conducted, it was a pretty straightforward exercise. Well, in the early 90s, Cold War was over. The consensus for large intelligence organizations started to not be as strong. And so the attitude was to get smaller. And another thing happened in that time frame. The internet exploded, and businesses and governments rushed to embrace this new thing called information technology for more efficiency and increased productivity and all the benefits that comes with today's telecommunications IT systems. As we were racing to embrace it, not many were thinking about the vulnerabilities that were being introduced. So as the new director of NSA, and we're thinking about how do we modify our break code operations going forward, I started to focus more on the make code side, because what I realized is on the break code side, it was very easy, incredibly easy, to exploit a network. And so if just looked at the United States at that time, we were the most connected, most digitally dependent nation on the globe. Therefore, my conclusion were we were the most vulnerable. So early days, I went around town. I visited the president, vice president, secretary of defense, director of central intelligence, the House, the Senate, gave a lot of speeches, made a lot of, wrote a lot of papers, and tried to make my case. But what I realized is the senior leadership just wasn't focused on this problem. They just were not digital natives, and you would talk to them about it, and they didn't quite understand the magnitude of what was happening. So I thought today in my comments, I will address the how to do CMMC, but the why to do CMMC. So my time in the NSA and the Navy ended up in 1996. I went to the private sector, and I focused on developing a cybersecurity practice. Now, the company I went to had a public and private sector area of focus, and the idea initially was go to the private sector, make it more secure. And what I found is they weren't interested. If you talked about security in the private sector, what they heard was cost, time, burden, weight, slows me down. I am just not interested. There was no real understanding of the increasing level of vulnerability. So in a business sense, we turned our attention back to the federal government, and in particular, those organizations that deal with and run on classified information, because they were the primary targets of nation states to gain information. So as we focused on that early, in many cases before other firms were focusing on it, we started to grow pretty rapidly. So we took something that was relatively small and built it out to a huge enterprise in a number of years. Now, I'm still cleared. I still serve on the advisory boards of some of the intelligence agencies, and still have an opportunity to have access to classified information. So in my NSA days, in the days as a contractor cleared, working this very issue, back as the DNI for a couple of years, and then back in the private sector, still focused on it. I've maintained those clearances to maintain an awareness of why. And so the driving factor here, it was alluded to by Dr. Sanders in his opening remarks. Nation states, as I'm going to contrast nation state threats as opposed to criminal threats. Criminal threats are serious. It costs the United States somewhere around $500 to $600 billion a year in terms of lost value. And that's important. That gets most of the attention, but it's not the most significant factor. The most significant factor is nation states have been capable of penetrating the defense contractors to a level that is unsurpassed in history. They have been able to not only get inside organizations to capture sensitive information, but technical information about weapons design and capability and so on, to the point they've been able to design countermeasures and processes to defeat our capability. And it's a pretty scary situation when you understand the magnitude of these penetrations from the nation state exploitation efforts. So DOD, I'll go back to the time I was serving as the Director of National Intelligence. I made my case to the President and his cabinet, and they listened and agreed, and the President agreed to fund a significant program. And of course, once you have agreement, you have to go to Congress and make the same arguments, and it takes a year or so to get the appropriation. And we got an appropriation, a significant one, $17 billion over 5 years to focus on this problem. The unfortunate part is we ran out of time. I was able to, the way the process works now, the Director of National Intelligence is responsible for briefing the candidates of the major parties during the campaign season. So whoever wins does not start from a point of newness on the first day that they win the election. So I had an opportunity to brief both candidates, Senator Obama at the time. I made my case to him. He agreed this is a significant problem. He said, look, and when we talked about terrorism and nuclear weapons design and all the usual threats that we're worried about. And he said, Mike, up till now, I've been worried about losing, but after talking to you, I'm starting to worry about winning. if I win, you come see me the first day and let's talk about this issue of cybersecurity. So I did. He won. I went to see him. He said, well, rather than endorse what was established by the previous administration, let me study it, and I will follow through on what we need to do about it as a nation. The study was conducted. He said all the right things. If you looked at his Rose Garden speech in June of 2009, he said exactly what we should do. Unfortunately, many issues and problems on the president's plate, and they tend to turn issues over to staff members to follow through. And the staff at the time was focused on different areas, lack of understanding. And so the outcome of that $17 billion was mostly wasted among the bureaucracies arguing over primacy and roles and function and missions. Was it a law enforcement issue? Was it a Homeland Security issue? Was it a DOD issue? So the money was not well spent. Meantime, the nation states were enjoying an unprecedented level of access into DOD and primarily through the major defense contractors. So toward the end of my time as DNI, DOD went through a situation where the Secretary of Defense's personal computer was penetrated by a nation state to capture sensitive information. And so the reaction was the Deputy Secretary of State was asked to set up something called the DIB, Defense Industrial Base Protection System. And so what we established was the National Security Agency would provide information, sensitive information, to the Defense Industrial Base so that they could better protect themselves. That program was established, but was never quite as effective as it was intended to be. What we learned over time is if a penetrator wants to get access to a major weapons system designed by a large defense contractor, the way in is to capture credentials from a second tier or third tier vendor. The second or third tier vendor providing a part or information related to the system has to have access. So the nation state would attack the second and third tier vendors to capture a credential to get on the inside. And when an assessment was done of this situation recently, that's when it was determined that there isn't a major weapons system in the United States inventory that hasn't been compromised, at least at some level. So DOD struggled for a while with what to do about this. And so various iterations of programs, the normal focus of a contract is cost, performance, and schedule. And so the discussion got serious to adding cybersecurity capability to cost, performance, and schedule. And then it was the matter of, well, what do we do? How do we actually make this happen? So I think it was a very creative thinking to realize you have to raise the cybersecurity profile, cybersecurity hygiene level of the vendors. All the potential ways in have to be addressed. And so Cmmc was devised as a method for helping third and second tier vendors to improve their cybersecurity hygiene. So that's where we are today. It's early in the program. There are many questions about how does one do it? What are the timelines? Can I compete for contracts if I'm not certified? And so a lot of those questions can be discussed today. I'm joined by Scheiber, who's heading up the organization that's going to oversee the certification process. So from this old-timer's point of view, this is a national strategic problem. Our major weapon systems have been penetrated as a result of access through cyber means. I'll say just a word about Cyber Florida, or the Center for Cybersecurity, which is hosted by the University of South Florida in Tampa. The mission is to work with the 12 state university system institutions, or 12 that are managed by the Board of Governors. These are the major universities in Florida. And our our mission, our task is to facilitate and increase education, cybersecurity research, and outreach to the community. Education, we need more numbers. The current shortfall across the United States is 500,000. It's somewhere around 25, 26,000 just in Florida. That number goes up every year. So skilled people with the right credentials need to be graduating from the universities to fill those jobs. The measure of merit in the past has been a company would know it was penetrated after it knew it took about 90 days to get the malware out. That measure of merit for the future should be 90 seconds to know and 90 seconds to eliminate. So that's how you would create the workforce to be capable of having a much higher level of insight and response capability for cybersecurity penetrations. The other area of research is to look at the total systems of information technology and devise ways to enhance cybersecurity protection. So we have a seed program where we invest in various universities with ideas and then attempt to, once we do the creative part of the research, get follow-on investment at the federal level, either DARPA or another part of DOD, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Science Foundation, the National Security Agency, to further develop and enhance our overall posture. The third part of our mission at Cyber Florida is outreach to the community, and that's what this is today. What we're sorting through now is what is the role that Cyber Florida will play. We'll be a facilitator. I think of us as an enabler. We're a relatively small staff. We have a reasonable budget, and it's not that we do things. We don't do the research. We don't do the education in the classroom, but we can facilitate activities by others to provide those services. So what we're sorting through is what will Cyber Florida do with regard to Cmmc certifications for the small and medium businesses across Florida to help them get certified. We don't know the answer to that yet. We thought we'd start with this seminar to introduce us and certifying authority represented by the next speaker, and then a panel of people from this community to talk about the issues. Terry Roberts, who was introduced to you earlier, has a career focused on this issue, has a business that helps small and medium businesses. So there's plenty of opportunity for those of you listening to ask questions and to get some insight and understanding about where this might go, what are the requirements, and how might I help myself, how much does it cost, how much am I at risk, and so on. So that's what we want to facilitate today. I'm available to answer any question I can. No question is off limits. So let me just stop there and turn it over to Ty to make some comments so you all can prepare questions for him and for me. Ty, over to you.
Well, thank you, sir. Great to be here with you all, and I really appreciate, Mike, your detailed history of the path that led up to this program. I think what's important is let's start with the intent and kind of a reminder of how the CMMC accreditation body was formed. Mike talked about his experiences in NSA and the make code and the break code. I think I characterize this program as the primary effort to prevent adversaries from take code. So in 1 year, the DoD PMO has made the case through really, I think, a remarkable orchestration of building, stakeholder agreement that what we're doing currently isn't working. Our adversaries are eating our lunch in terms of $600 billion a year in exfil. And they've made the case to get the unified standard, cyber standard, to resolve this issue that you outlined. It's included in the NDAA. It's now going through the rule change to make it part of the DFARS regulations. Primary mission is to basically protect the information and to change the culture. And what they also have done in terms of new acquisition documentation is they have made cyber the foundation of acquisition, not just a pillar like cost, schedule, and performance. Because without it as the foundation, the other things really aren't going to matter in terms of maintaining our primacy in national security. So it's very important. No doubt, it's complex, it's complicated, and I think there's some things that are important for the audience to know in terms of, we in lockstep with the DoD program office are approaching this in a deliberately incremental manner, crawl, walk, run. And you've heard, the mama of CMMC, Katie Arrington, and the others from the program office talk about that context, so that's important. So our organization as an accreditation body was formed in January this year. DoD had sent out RFIs. They got 10 responses for an accreditation body. They were looking for essentially a nonprofit entity to come in and do this. Through the November timeframe, we established working groups to try to figure out the scope of what this would be, could be, should be. And we actually formed as an entity in January 21st, but who's counting? Our mission is essentially to ensure that we implement a clear, consumable, and consistent CMMC assessment and certification methodology that supports the organization seeking certification, or OSCs, in getting the CMMC certifications that they'll need to be eligible for award of DoD contracts or subcontracts. The OSCs in the DIB, or Defense Supply Chain, that whole ecosystem is really who this program is all about. To make sure that those organizations and entities, that play such a critical role in national defense, protect the information as they do, the important work associated with our defense industry. So a little bit more about the AB. We are not a government entity. We are registered as a non-stock corporation in Maryland with a application with the IRS for 501c3. Consists of an all-volunteer board of directors currently. The directors come from a diverse range of experience and life's work. Small businesses, large businesses, some with former government experience as senior civilians. The directors serve as individuals and not as representatives of their parent organizations. My day job's with University of Virginia, but represent CMMC as myself. There's not an affiliation, a corporate affiliation with any of the board members in their CMMC AB work. The board is founded on very strong ethics and mission focus. Directors cannot be individual assessors nor affiliated with C3PAO. All directors are subject to strict conflict of interest policies. It requires disclosure and or recusal where there's any potential conflict. So just keeping everything transparent and above board. We're currently in the process of the executive search to find our CEO and start the onboarding of professional staff. It's now 7 months that we've stood up as an entity and laid in the infrastructure and the process methodologies that have been accomplished to date. We've basically been director doers as opposed to director protectors. So now we're at a point in our plan and our evolution where we'll start to onboard the professional staff that will represent, the employees of the company nonprofit entity that will do this full time as opposed to in service. And our main focus is operationalize the training, accreditation, certification aspects of the CMMC model and standard that represents DoD's intent. So as a starting point, I think that's important. I think a couple other things that are you've heard of a Memorandum of Understanding, as well as we have that in place, and we're working a no-cost contract that'll help us mechanize and guide elements of the relationship. That'll put in place rigorous prereqs and controls that ensure that this gets done in a manner that's in keeping with the mission as well as best practices. And we're working and shaping that together with our DoD partner. The final thing I want to make sure everybody understands is, from the beginning, this is something that we're building together. We're not building it on you, we're building it with you. CMMC really is a team sport. And from the earliest days, we've tried to establish that we are a listening organization, and we work together in close collaboration with DoD and industry partners to make sure that we design, develop, and implement something that's effective, scalable, and reliable, and affordable. As affordable as possible, in keeping with ensuring that cybersecurity requirements are achieved. We've had working groups. We've had hundreds of webinars as well, and outreach to make sure that we provide as much information as is available at any given point in time. And back to the point that this is both complex and complicated, and being developed in a deliberate crawl, walk, run format. This is not unlike you would expect a large weapon systems acquisition to go. You build a little, test a little, and you try to wring it out before you go live to make sure that your operational effectiveness and suitability are both in line. So I think by way of introduction, Mike, I think hopefully that's helpful context. The last thing I'd tell you is that there's some things that are really important to understand, and we're trying to learn from where other certification bodies have not been as successful as perhaps they would have liked, and that's consistency. We don't want customer experience or outcomes to vary based on interpretation. We're working very hard to ensure that our assessment baseline is in accordance with the standard and is clear, consumable, and consistent to take out the guesswork for anybody that has to go through the actual assessment process, as well as for the assessors who are chartered with doing it. So I'll go off transmit for a minute, and we can go from there.
Ty, this is Ron. Thanks very much for those remarks. Mike, any reaction, any questions for Ty? Well, we've got a few, but you sort of get first dibs.
I thought his comments were very informative. I learned a lot. My question would be timing. Ty, if you could give us an appreciation for when do you expect this to be up and operating in a full-time status? I know there's some indications of certification required this year. I don't know that that's possible. So if you forecast to the future and you think about having the organizations up, it's functioning, and it's capable of doing what it's been asked to do, what do you see the time horizon to likely be?
Great question. We are well into what we call the mock phase right now. And what the mock phase is, that the accreditation body is working closely with the PMO, as well as with the DIBCAC, Hopkins, APL, other government or government contractors that are in the ecosystem to ring out the initial volley of training, as well as the initial volley of assessments. We've gone through the mock training in the first 2 rounds of mock assessments. There's another round of mock assessments that are done here in the August timeframe. We'll take that feedback and we'll roll it into what we were calling the provisional training. Now, the mock period is all government employees or government contractors. Provisional now is we take the feedback from mock and we are actually training real assessors who are affiliated with real CMMC third-party assessor organizations or C3POs. And we engage them in a series of additional service-specific pilots or pathfinders, and potentially some level of certifications with OSCs. That takes us into if everyone's not aware of this process called rule change is essentially the OMB sponsored process by which the FAR rules are getting adopted, and there's many other entities involved, but at the end of the day, that is the process by which the new integrated cyber standard will come out. that in probably the January timeframe, after it's about ready to enter its public comment period here soon. After January and after rule change is complete, we'll have a clear understanding, we collectively, the PMO specifically, of what the model looks like after that, what if any changes have been made. It's after that period where DoD is then authorized to incorporate Cmmc in whatever instantiation exists after rule change into acquisitions. And it's not all happening at once. Okay, they're looking again, crawl, walk, run. In this mock process that we're talking about, it also includes the government side of the house, as far as, and DAU is Defense Acquisition University, is leading the charge to help shape the training for the procurement specialists across the services to figure out how to take CMMC, and based on the weapon systems procurement, what level of CMMC is required for the prime to have. And that takes some, how do you express those requirements in an RFI? How do you express those requirements in an RFP? What are the different scenarios in terms of how that can play out, and what curveballs could be thrown at involved parties along the way? So that's what's happening now. But the actual requirement for procurements will not happen until after rule change concludes, which right now best estimate is probably in the early January timeframe. And after that point, the expectation is that contracts will gradually start to be released by the services that have the CMMC requirements in them. The specific flow, that's a program office question, but it will be gradual. It's not going to be all at once. And I think the important thing for folks to understand is that the certification is required at time of award, not at time of bid. So you can certainly anticipate that as we stand up and ramp this up to get enough assessors and 3PAOs in the ecosystem to handle the load, when you look at the 300,000 plus entities that are OSCs that are part of the DIB, that'll take a while. So the DoD has by 2026, they expect that all procurements will have CMMC as a requirement, but it will be a gradual ramp. So it's not required today. It's not required as of November. But I think the other important thing is that organizations should not wait to prepare. If you simply reference the 110 controls of NIST 800-171 and start to use that as the CMMC standard is and assessment methodologies are being finalized, that'll help you get ahead of the power curve for sure.
So Ty, it sounds like the fact that you're still wading through lots of government bureaucracy is a blessing in disguise. It means there's lead time for folks on the line to actually look at standards that hopefully will resemble those that are ultimately established in the DAR, and start getting ready now for that ultimate run stage while you're busy crawling and walking.
That's true, and Ron, I just want to be clear. It really isn't the government bureaucracy. I mean, government bureaucracy it's a relative term, right? I mean, there are things that we all would hope are given their due process and diligence as the government does what the government has to do. In the meantime, it's not slowing us down as we work together with the PMO to put this in place. There's an incredible amount that has to get done, and it's really been a fascinating journey watching and being a Marine Corps weapons acquisition guy by trade, and then being in the defense and aerospace business for a lot of years. The pace at which government is moving to move this along has been, in my experience, remarkable and frankly unprecedented. To basically declare a new program, not from whole cloth, because there's a whole lot of history, as Mike outlined up front, and the recognition finally that we must do something different than what we're currently doing. But it's working as fast as I've ever seen it work, and there's certainly some things that we wish could push along, but it is what it is, and it's I think it gives us the time, like you rightly pointed out, to make sure that we get this thing, wrung out very thoroughly before we go live and have, basically after a rule change after the first of the year.
Ty, this Mike, just a comment in the form of a question. It would seem to me that based on what you just described, what's coming and so on, it's absolutely required. I mean, I would be the first to stand up and say we must do this. As a nation, we have no other choice. But if I'm a small business and I'm thinking about, and I understand what you just said, it would seem to me that one of the best things I could do would be an assessment of where I am. I'd start with the NIST pub that you mentioned. I think it was NIST 800-71. I think that's the one. But if you just start look at that to see what are the various aspects of controls and so on you need to think about, and you put yourself through a self-assessment now, you're going to be way ahead of what's coming when the program is finalized. So would you agree with that? And would you offer any other advice for somebody who's in the early stages of thinking about it now?
No, you're absolutely right. I think, if you think about it, level 3 for CMMC is comprised of 130 controls total. 110 of them are directly lifted from 800-171. So if you start there with something that's well known, very mature and stable, and start to really reflect on, how you stack up if you're a small business looking at that, that's absolutely the right thing to start right now. It sounds daunting. I'm not a standards and accreditation professional by trade. I've been around cyber and C4I forever. So learning a lot new, but when you pick up the standard and you look through it, the questions are really a lot more straightforward in terms of at least understanding what the requirements are. And it'll also allow small businesses to identify areas that aren't clear to them and where they may need to get some help in terms of interpreting what the requirement is and how they might address it. So, but start now. Get smart on those component parts, and you'll be in great shape. The vast majority of the DIB is expected to only require level 1. And those are 17 controls that are very basic cyber hygiene things that we should be doing anyway, whether they were required or not. So just don't avoid looking at the model and the standard. Dig in right away. I think you'll gain both understanding and comfort from just what that will reveal. I think the other thing to make sure everybody understands, this isn't going to be perfect right out the chute, and this isn't something that is there is a lot of focus and a lot of attention, including from the PMO and the other programs, the Office of Small Business Programs, and Mr. Shannon Jackson is a partner in this as well. 75% of AB board members are small business owners as well, present company included. So we're very sensitive to making sure that this is something that is both consumable and affordable for small business. And it's a work in progress, but I think the biggest suggestion I'd have in addition to everything we just talked about is don't fear it. It's got to be done. Just get your mind around the fact that we're all in this together, and we're going to find a way to make sure, one, that it happens, and that it happens in a manner that should not concern you in terms of cost or pain or time. That's the objective.
Ty, real quick, Ty and Mike, just a time check. We have about 6 or 8 minutes to go before we take a break, but if we run along, we run along. Folks, let me remind you to submit your questions through the questions tab. And Mike and Ty, if you'll permit me, I have one from our audience. Ty, you've already touched on this, I think, a little bit, but the questioner asks, I'm a small business DoD contractor. Any sense of where a small or medium-sized business that's not in the IT or cybersecurity domain, where they might struggle to meet that level 1 certification? What's going to be the biggest challenge for them, do you think?
I don't think that level 1 will be a challenge for any company, whether you're in the IT domain or not. I think, again, those 17 controls for level 1 are very basic, and they shouldn't be something that are daunting. I mean, if you're if you have a business, at home, most of these are things that you should be doing anyway. So I think, again, if you're in business, period, in this, cyber arena that we're currently in, that's been re-emphasized by everything going on with COVID, I think level 1 is a low bar that everybody should strive for and not have a whole lot of problem in getting there.
I like your term, cyber hygiene. I think level 1 is pretty much basic cyber hygiene. And if you're not meeting those standards, boy, you sure better be.
Yes, sir.
Mike, anything you'd like to add?
Oh, I think the answer was spot on. Everybody, a private individual, somebody that's not in business, just dealing with their family, should think seriously about cyber hygiene at level 1. Having changing passwords, two-factor authentication, verification, understanding how to recognize a phishing email. That's basic use of the technology. The analogy for me is, as a youngster learning to drive an automobile, you had a parent or a teacher or something that told you the basics of the car for car safety. And so I'm an advocate for having the basics of security taught to people who have laptops or desktops or mobile devices. They just need to have some appreciation for how they're exploited by outsiders. And so that's how I think of level 1.
Thanks, Mike. Let me ask one more question, and then we'll take a break. And thank you both for your time. Mike will be with us. Ty is going to stay as long as he can. Ty, you may not be able to answer this question because it may be something that you'll address through rulemaking. But one of our audience members asked, while the cost of certification will be an allowable contract cost, are the costs associated with reaching compliance also an allowable expense?
That's really a program office question. I mean, those costs are going to be part of the normal overhead and G&As that individual organizations experience, up to and through the assessment process. So I honestly can't speak to where the allowability of costs associated with certification, where that framework or dividing line exists or not. So that's really not mine to answer, but it's a great question.
Ron, I can offer a comment. To get prepared for this, I went into the various websites to look at the frequently asked questions, and having been a defense contractor and having been focused on cybersecurity, I was very interested in what's allowable. And at least the background information I read said if you are spending money to make yourself better postured from the cybersecurity point of view, particularly to meet these requirements, all that is allowable cost.
Would make sense.
Right, and I think that's very helpful for our audience. Ty, in the interest of time, we'll give everyone a break, but any final closing remarks on your part? And Mike, if you have no objection, we'll save your closing remarks for the end of the program. That'll keep people with us. But Ty, I know you're going to stay as long as you can, but since this will end part 1, any final thoughts from you?
No, just gratitude for you all, for Cyber Florida for putting on this forum. The best way we can combat fear and uncertainty is by sharing information. We don't have all the answers right now. We're in the process of working it out. But please, cmmcab.org is basically the authoritative source of information. There's opportunities to engage in working groups there. Again, we want to build this with you. There's opportunity. There's also forums there to ask questions, and there's a pretty robust description of what the opportunities to participate in the ecosystem are. If you want to be an assessor, if you want to be a C3PAO, if you want to be an instructor, if you want to build curriculum, if you want to deliver curriculum. So that's where you can go, again, cmmcab.org, to get additional information in its as solid a form as it exists at this time. So keep the cards and letters coming. Keep the curiosity and the quest for clarity, alive and well, and that'll help us make sure that we address your concerns and incorporate them as we're able, as we build this thing to be effective. We don't want CMMC just to be a checklist. It really is intended to change the way we think about cybersecurity on behalf of the DIB. And I think everyone's also heard the likelihood that it will become the national agency and department paradigm as well. And it has international ramifications as well. And anything we can do to shore that up not only helps defense, it helps our country in terms of our competitive advantage in maintaining that primacy. So thank you again for inviting me, and I'll stand by for some of the panel.
Great, Ty.
Ron,
What a great bumper sticker. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
I just one final comment from my side, and it's intended more for the next session, the panelists, and also the audience that's listening. And my question would be, I described Cyber Florida's mission, what we do. So I'd ask the panelists and the listeners, what would you like to see Cyber Florida attempt to do with regard to CMMC? Do you want us to enable other universities to teach courses, or provide some level of reference material, or what would be most helpful to the small and medium businesses in Florida that Cyber Florida could contribute to? I don't know exactly what we would do or how, but I'd sure love to hear what people would like to see so we can think our way through it.
Thanks, Mike. That's very helpful. And of course, Ty, any thoughts you have on that score are more than welcome. I was just going to add in closing, what a great bumper sticker. And it's something I think worth underscoring at the end, that you're building this with small and medium-sized and large businesses, not for them. This is not the case of we're from the government, we're here to help. This is a joint collaborative effort. And I think that's an opportunity that everyone should take advantage of.
Absolutely.
Mike and Ty, thanks very much for doing this first segment. Why don't we take 10 minutes and reconvene at 1:35. I've given you 5 more minutes, but that's because we ran over 5. So 1:35, we'll start with Terry Roberts and her esteemed panel. All right, everybody, thanks very much, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
Thanks, Ron.
Hi, Guy, you ready?
We all are.
Yeah, coming online right now. Coming online right now.
Great.
A lot of good information in that first part of the session, that was for sure.
Yeah, I think we could have gone. I was worried that we wouldn't have enough to fill an hour, and I think we could have gone another 30 minutes and not run out of gas.
No, not on this topic. There's so much out there, and there's a lot of fear and uncertainty as well. And I think that's the big thing we want to tackle is let's kind of work the process. You know, don't make the problem worse by guessing.
Yeah, I think your notion that there's a lot of fear out there, that's a great one. And if you get the opportunity, I would emphasize that it's nothing to be fearful of.
No, I mean, first of all, you know, it's not like we're going to shut down the entire defense industry base, so we're not going to do that. So this is going to be a process, and DoD is aware of this process, and it's going to just like they've been saying, and the Admiral made it clear, you know, we're working together to do this, and Ty made that very clear too. You know, this isn't something being imposed on everybody, it's something we're working together to improve everybody's security.
Right, I think that's spot on. So Kate, are we live?
We are indeed. We're ready to resume.
Great. Thanks, Kate, and thanks again to Ty and to Mike for that great opening segment. I hope everybody had a chance to take a few minutes and relax. Our experience with these webinars is that if you're not careful, you'll go back to back to back to back to back and find yourself wrung out at the end of the day. So we wanted to plug in a 10-minute respite for everyone, but we're ready to resume. We've got about another hour or so to go, and we'll go through the same drill. I'm going to introduce Terry Roberts. I've already touched on her bio, as has Mike, but she's also a member of the Cyber Florida Board of Advisors, and that's one of the reasons she agreed to do this pro bono. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry in 1 second. I will let everyone know that we'll go till about 1:15 or so with our panelists. You should, as before, submit questions through the questions tab, and we'll turn to those audience questions at about 2:15. Go till about 2:25, 2:27. Just make a few closing remarks, and then we'll be done. So bear with us. I see that Ty is still with us, so thanks for staying with it, Ty. Mike is still on the line as well. So Ms. Roberts, over to you. And Terry, you may be on mute.
Actually, I was not. Can you hear me now?
We can all hear you just fine.
Okay, great. So welcome back, everybody. I'm going to do some quick introductions, but I'm going to give Ty a heads up that we're going to circle back quickly from the panelists so that they get a chance to each ask you a quick question up front. Just from my perspective, I really come at CMMC from a broad perspective, both as a senior in the military, as an executive in the IC, as an executive at Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, as an executive in industry, and now for the last 5 years with my own company, focused on the risks, the cyber risks of small and mid-sized businesses. So I have had the luxury of enabling small and mid-sized businesses and how difficult it is for them to get to step 1 and 2, especially if they don't have a technology background or a cyber risk background. So I want to make sure we also address those perspectives. Quickly, I'm going to go through introductions. I know one of our panelists is having some connectivity issues, but I'm going to introduce everybody. First, we have Guy Garrett, who I am naming as our innovative educator version of the panel. He is currently the Assistant Director of the Center for Cybersecurity at the University of West Florida. He is a career computer scientist and engineer and MBA, and before academia worked in journalism, political consulting, and business. But he transitioned to academia over a decade ago, founding the cybersecurity program at Gulf Coast State College in Panama City, Florida. Guy is a nationally recognized innovative educator and thought leader in workforce development, risk management, and cybersecurity strategy, and a member, this is the most important thing, he is a member of the National Initiative for Cyber Education working group, the NICE working group, which I was involved in at the very beginning. So great to have you. Our next panelist is Dan Holland. Dan is our solution and service developer, cyber solution and service developer, and a DIB company owner. He is the founder and CEO of, and I'm going to say it wrong, Dan, Arete?
It's Arete.
Thank you. Sorry. Solutions for the past 3 years, a cyber solutions and service company. Dan is a career IT hardware, software, and services solution provider to both the federal government and commercial sector. Starting his career as a U.S. Coast Guard officer, Dan has been an Insight Enterprises field account executive for commercial enterprises and sales, a senior product manager responsible for the partnership with Hewlett Packard. Today, Dan is also representing the local AFCEA chapter and the NVSBC chapters. He leads educational outreach programs looking to address the expanding shortage of certified cyber talent. And last, which I hopefully Nick Chadwick will be able to rejoin us, he is our on the operational edge cyber practitioner. He is a special ops and information operations professional, currently the senior cloud architect at US SOCOM since 2017, working on cloud architecture and implementation to include DevSecOps initiatives. And he is also an Army reservist on the Cyber and Electromagnetic Activities Portfolio Group in the 75th Innovation Command, continuously serving in the Special Ops Forces, including PsyOps, Civil Affairs, and Headquarters SOCOM. And he was deployed in 2006 as the officer in charge of the Psychological Operations Task Force in Iraq. So as I gave you all a little bit of warning to ask Ty some questions that you think haven't already been asked, Guy, I'm going to go first to you. What would you like to ask Ty?
Ty, our interest in this, of course, is trying to help figure out a way to initiate training for all the people we're going to need to do to perform these audits and get these people certified. Can you describe a little bit about where that process is right now? I know you're just taking applications at the first couple of levels, but can you describe where that process is going and what that's going to look like so educational institutions like ours can ramp up and help people get in the field with the skills they need to do this job?
Ty, I think you're on mute.
That transgression would usually result in $1 to the Boeing fund. So sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. Great question. Clearly, this is something that'll happen across the country, and so our training model, and I explained previously, mock and then provisional. From provisional, after rule change, we take whatever changes are there, roll those into the training curriculum from a learning objectives and from an examination perspectives. We will retain those things as an inherently CMMC AB element. There are 2 opportunities for training in terms of nationwide and becoming part of the actual training infrastructure. That's the licensed training provider and the licensed partner publisher. Both of those require application and vetting, and then a certification process to make sure that if you're a publisher, you're doing it in accordance with the standard that we establish. and the same thing for LTPs that are, universities, community colleges, other organizations that do training for a living. They have to have instructors that come in and get certified, and they have to have an organizational license essentially to do this on the behalf of the AB to deliver the training curriculum to whatever entity or individual in this CMMC ecosystem is going through a particular program, and then we will make sure that they conduct, or that we can make sure the examinations for that result in their certification and or licensure are something that we basically control as an AB. Does that answer your question?
It does. What kind of costs are associated with, for example, if a school like the state college, community college systems are a great example. That's where I came from. We do a lot of certifications there. We do that at the University of West Florida through the center as well. So
Right.
what type of cost are we talking about? Because for those organizations, cost is a big issue, especially right now.
Of course. Don't have that bracketed yet. That's we're early in the process, so that's something we're clearly watching close, because we want to make sure that this is affordable and achieves the objective. And part of it also comes down to market economics, and part of making sure that there's robust competition out there for these kinds of things for organizations that go through and maintain or adhere to the standard and get licensed to do it. We want best of breed out there. So a lot of the actual cost in terms of what it takes an institution that wants to participate in delivering curriculum is going to be up to them and their cost model, and making sure that it's affordable.
Fair enough.
Okay, I'm going to take the prerogative of the moderator and jump in with a quick question, Ty. What is the role of the CMMC Advisory Board RFPs or RFIs that a couple have already come out? What's that all about? What are you trying to achieve?
Like you would imagine in any RFI or RFP, it's to seek information regarding what's out there in the market to address a specific need that the AB may have. I guess that's, as part of our market research, as we assemble what our acquisition strategy is to, fill our needs as an AB. That's the process that we use. Now, to be clear, we're not a DoD entity. We're not bound by government acquisition rules. We have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we do that. But the objective is to make sure that to the degree necessary and appropriate, we articulate our needs and take advantage of the great work that's been done across the marketplace to harvest and harness whatever we can, so we're not reinventing the wheel. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yep, that sounds good. Dan, over to you.
All right, thank you. So as you know, I'm sitting here both as a small business owner, somebody who's 3 years into the journey, whose biggest customer is the DoD, and I've got a lot of unanswered questions from that perspective. I'm also here because it's my business to help customers do cybersecurity as efficiently and effectively as possible. And so, my question to Ty, I want to take that conversation down to a more operational level, so that folks watching can, step away from the computers, stretch after a 2-hour webinar here, and feel that they have a little bit more clarity and perspective about the business investments that they have to make and should be making beyond an assessment, which gives you visibility but doesn't make a tangible impact on your security posture or the risk that you're facing. And it also doesn't address the business opportunity of doing cybersecurity really well, and how when you take your digital value seriously and take security and risk seriously in this space, brand new marketplaces get opened up to you where you can really add a lot of value to your business. So if I had to name my number one concern for you, Ty, it's asking what the right approach I should take in serving the defense industrial base, but also becoming compliant myself while avoiding some of the obvious ethical concerns between the third-party assessment organizations and the service providers, managed service providers, integrators, and vendors that ultimately are going to have to be purchased by the defense industrial base to meet these compliance standards. I hope my question is clear there. There's the becoming an assessor, which is going to cost about $3,000. Every organization that asks to be served.
Dan, you could just hone it a little bit. What's the bottom line for Ty? What do you want to know?
The bottom line for Ty is the balance between and where the line is going to be drawn between the assessment organizations and the service providers that are working with the defense industrial base to become compliant.
Got it. All right, fair question. I'd break it down this way. On our website, and you've seen the announcements for registered provider organizations, registered practitioners. Those are essentially on the make ready side of the house, right? The non-assessment side of the house. And the idea there is that the RPOs make sure that they employ staff that are trained in the basic methodology. It's non-certified, services. You're bound by a professional code of conduct. I'll get to that in a minute because you mentioned something that's near and dear to all our hearts, which is OCI. And then it's focused on the CMMC preparation piece. The registered practitioner or registered provider is basically designed for those who have the ability and desire to serve the defense supply chain as an advisor or as an MSP. You're trained in the basic methodology. It's targeted to include the CMMC awareness in service delivery, and it's trusted, bound by a code of professional conduct. Now, importantly, those are not requirements, all right, by DoD. They're not requirements for you to participate in that. It's part of what we put in place to ensure that as I'll call it the community of practice, maybe that's an overused term, but I think it's important that anyone that's out there saying, I can help you make ready for CMMC OSC has to have some basic foundational elements of information in place. I'll talk about the code of professional conduct. Now, you can be an RPO and you can be a C3PAO, okay? But you can't do it for the same organization. If you are helping a company make ready, you cannot also be involved in their assessment. So that's how we divide and conquer and try to keep lanes deconflicted in that regard. Does that answer your question, Dan?
It does. Thank you, Ty.
Okay.
Actually, that's the clearest I've ever heard it. So thank you very much, because a lot of folks have been asking that same question. Guy, before I go to you for your opening remarks and then on to Dan for his, Ty, could you talk a little more about the role of your working groups? And if you weren't able to get on them initially, is there going to be a process of, where people are on for a certain period of time and then new members roll on? Is there some kind of refreshment that will be occurring?
Fair question. The construct of a working group, and just so everybody understands, so the board has directors, the board has committees. Committees are led by directors who actually are enabled with board approval to establish working groups. Working groups are comprised of, non-directors, non-board members, and basically from, the entire stakeholder base of whomever wants to participate. We've had, as you can imagine, in some of the working groups that have been launched, overwhelming interest in terms of participation. And bluntly, having a working group of 150 people is not wieldy and won't get you to really any answer. So participation's been limited. Working groups exist for two reasons. One, to solve point issues. That means the working group assembles, does their body of work, brings their recommendations or courses of action back to the committee for decisioning, and forward to the board for final adjudication and decision. Or they are persistent, so that gives you the framework. It doesn't directly answer your question. There is no specific plan, if you will, based on where we are with working groups. to have a refresh of working groups that are, at any specific interval. It's not that that's not a bad idea to consider, particularly if a working group is persistent in nature. What I will tell you, though, is we fully expect the need to establish new working groups as we go forward. So we expect some level of persistent opportunity to show itself over this journey for others who want to participate, to become involved in the process as formal working group members. So that's as clear as I have it at this point, Terry, but it's a great question. Hopefully that scratches the itch for now, and more to come, because you planted a seed. Thank you.
I always find that when I run committees that I want to build in a refresh, because sometimes I want to help people move on.
Indeed.
Okay, Guy, if you could do two things, if you could just give us some opening remarks, from the Cyber Florida perspective, or what you in particular are interested in and working on related to CMMC. And also if you want to highlight any of the key takeaways from the CMMC model, from the approach to the general audience. Over to you.
All right, thank you. So the Center for Cybersecurity is based at the University of West Florida, which is up in the northwest corner of the state. We work in partnership with Cyber Florida and other members of the SUS system, State University system, in terms of advancing cybersecurity awareness, training, and education. Now, in our case, we have our talented students who are going through degree programs, and we're graduating those individuals to go into these different jobs. But there's another aspect to what we have to do, and that is training incumbent workers and sometimes career changers. For example, veterans is a nice target area for us, because these people are coming out, they have a clearance. How do we transition them without having to go through a 2 or 4 year degree? So we work a lot in that space. Now, I've had the pleasure, some people would say the burden, but I enjoy it, of working in the risk management side of this thing, partly because of my business experience. And what I'm discovering, because we're working right now with other small business entities that are outside the DIB, they're going through the same thing. They're trying to find ways of becoming more cyber secure. And when you look at the CMMC process and the things that came out from NIST, it's kind of dovetailing into the risk management framework, the cyber security framework by NIST, these other tools and models that we've had for some time. In this particular case, it gets a little bit more specific because of the nature of the information you're dealing with. I mean, even unclassified information channels for a defense contractor have the potential for exploiting something that could maybe lead into something that's a lot more sensitive or classified, and that's something we don't want. We definitely don't want our enemies getting a hold of the things that we're doing to try to keep our nation safe. So what we're finding is that a couple of angles are really important right now. One, we want to help with the awareness of what CMMC is, and if you are bound to this particular process, don't be afraid. There are two aspects of it. One, the technical aspect, which seems quite obvious to anybody whether they're technical or not. If you start reading through the material, you start seeing all these different controls. I know I just went through SANS training on the CIS control set. And if you're an IT person like Dan is, that's non sequitur. That's something we see all the time. I'm very familiar with it, especially on the network side with what I do. And it's normal for us. But a lot of these companies don't have an IT person. They may have a service provider, and is that service provider up to snuff on these particular things? But the other piece of it I think gets missed is policy. So you can have all of these documents, you can have a good assessment tool that comes in and tells you what you're missing, but as I think Dan mentioned earlier, how do you implement that at an operational level? Well, it's got to start with some form of policy in your organization. And that's really where we're seeing a lot of, especially in the small business space, there's a big gap in knowledge, because entrepreneurs by nature aren't sitting around writing policy documents like a corporation would. They don't have lawyers on staff that are going through all these things. Even in university, we have a legal department. We need a policy. They draft it and it goes through the process. But these policies are important, and they're a fundamental piece of this puzzle. So we're trying to not only address the technical needs of this particular process, but we're also trying to help people understand the policies that they need in place and how to either write those policies or how to find organizations that could also do that work. And a lot of times the policy folks and the people, typing on the keyboard are two different sets. I'm one of the weird ones. I do both. I'm just weird hybrid. I'm a mutant. But
Okay.
that's where we're working.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm going to make one plug. I love, and I think during COVID we all feel this way. I love online training and education. You know, if there's any way that you all could develop an online, maybe working with the CMMC advisory board, but an online training program. You know, sort of that crawl, walk, run, and maybe there's, you know, one module that's for executives, you know, of a company, because everyone needs to have a high level understanding, and then, right, that next level down for the actual implementers, right, level. But I'll just throw that at you because I love giving homework assignments.
Well, actually, Terry, we appreciate that, and I'd love to talk to you at another time about your thoughts on that. It'd be a phenomenal thing. We're currently right now working on a project for the small business development centers in the risk management and threat hunting space. So I'd love to talk with you offline, or anyone else who'd like to contact me and get your ideas, because that's definitely my expertise in training is actually in the online sphere. So I'd love to hear more about what you guys would like, and let's find a way to roll it out.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Dan, over to you. So a little bit of, I love for you to take that role as someone who's both going to have to do this yourself as a small business, and someone who is an enabler, you know, for others. But also, what have your initial takeaways from the, you know, CMMC model been so far? Thanks.
Thanks, Terry. And I want to first build on Guy's comments about you know, where we begin, right? We eat the elephant one piece at a time, right? And if you just open up the documents, like Mike and Ty said, and you start reading them, it's stuff that anybody could you can write your own policy. It doesn't have to cost you a lot of money for a lot of this level 1 stuff at all. Like, you just knock it out, because it's really simple stuff. If you've got an antivirus on your computer, some basic authentication stuff, you're really set. So to Mike and Ty's encouragement, please open it up and look at it. It'll make the whole thing a lot less scary, and that gives you something to build on, if that really is your starting point. Second, Guy, you accused me of being an IT smart guy, and I got to qualify my statements. I speak Dolphin, but I've never been a Dolphin operator. I've just spent enough time with guys like Nick to where it rubs off, and sometimes people mistake me for one of them. But you know, what you said about the small businesses, the large businesses being in the same exact position as the federal government is, and you know, everybody's facing the same issues in our customer base, at least, with everybody being remote all of a sudden, all of the computing being done in the cloud. Traditional ways to approach cybersecurity with that walled garden approach just aren't sufficient anymore. So the thing that I'm hearing from everybody more than anything else is around this concept of zero trust, where we shift the focus from preventing breaches to containing them. And in doing so, we eliminate vast quantities of risk that's quantifiable very simply, and can also architect it in such a way that takes a lot of OpEx out of the cybersecurity model. Again, that's a federal government initiative, and that's a civilian corporate initiative equally right now, and emerging as a best practice, even though that concept of least privilege is not new. It's just the right way to do security right now with this environment that we're all living in. The tools in the vendor community, there's a lot of snake oil out there too. So everybody's claiming a lot of these things, and there's other buzzwords like SASE floating around. It's good to have perspective from folks that really do know what they're talking about. So we can't talk about cybersecurity and doing it well if we don't talk about the cybersecurity workforce gap, and having talent that you can bring in-house to rely on, as well as having a robust vendor community to draw on, which is really what the DoD is looking for here. Raise the standards so that we can trust our vendor community to operate at a basic level of confidence, so that together we might innovate and take advantage of some of the opportunities to win in this digital world that we've decided to play in and put so much of our value in, and our competitive advantage in. Nobody has more to lose than the Americans in this digital space. So it's important that we do security well and take it seriously as a society. The time is now, so we need folks like Guy that are are developing these education programs that are pushing it out, and making it relatable and achievable for folks to build on a foundation, which is really all we're looking for with CMMC as well.
Dan, since I see Nick has joined us, I'm gonna try to transition to Nick, but of course I have to give you a homework assignment too. So as you speak to, you know, all of the folks out there who are developing enablers, right, to help companies reach whatever CMMC level they need to get to, you know, I think AFCEA, of which you're also representing today, can be a great forum for being able to showcase, right? I call it speed dating demoing, where folks can get up there and talk about their services. So that would be something that would be great to get out there, because that's a nice virtual way to have exposure and bake-offs.
Yes, I know AFCEA does host industry days and tech forums, and that's all moved virtual. And Nick's actually on the board of the local AFCEA chapter as well, and has a great perspective on this issue. So I'm really interested. I'm glad you got dialed back in here, and we can hear his thoughts on the issue.
Hey, welcome, Nick Chadwick. I'm calling you our on the operational edge cyber practitioner, since you have been a special ops professional, cyber professional, and information operations professional your whole career. So if you want to do your opening remarks, but we're also highlighting anything that you want to showcase regarding the CMMC model and how you're coming at it.
Right, thank you. So can you hear me right now? Can you give me a thumbs up, Dan, if you got? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had some technical difficulties earlier with the power. Anyway, so going forward with the CMMC, I think it's very much like what the CMMI used to be, but obviously adapting a lot of different industry standards together to make the best of breed capabilities. What I would like to talk about today and attack is, how are your service providers, external service providers, complying with CMMC? What is their basis for doing that? And how can you ask the right questions from them to ensure that they're looking at it in the right way and answering the CMMC audit questions correctly? Because as those assessors come in, they're going to ask specific questions in a way that may not be semantically what they're used to. I run into that a lot. And again, I'd like to caveat everything that I say as saying these are my own opinions off my own career and experience, not the official US SOCOM word. I'm not here to represent SOCOM as a whole, but I have worked there for the last 3 years, actually 4 years total, but 3 years as the cloud architect, predating the DoD CIO's DevSecOps initiative, where I did go and talk to the DoD CIO at the Mark Center and work with them prior to them spinning up their own DevSecOps initiative. At SOCOM, we were doing this, starting this back in 2017, and working with containers and microservices and how do we secure those, right? So I'm glad to see that initiative has moved forward with Nicholas Chalan and the folks over at Platform One, and we built our own so that we can actually host some of those capabilities within SOCOM, including vendors that are building COTS products and GOTS products for us. And we're providing that environment for them, really, to do the inspections on their applications, down to the application code scanning, and also the container scanning to be able to host it. But honestly, what I want to talk about today is just the focus of how you can ask the right questions for those vendors that you're third-party contracting for, whether that's for external SOC, Security Operations Center activities, whether that is a CASB, a Cloud Access Security Broker, or if you even know what I'm talking about right now and you don't have either of those. Asking the appropriate questions so that you get the right answers and that you can effectively communicate your needs and requirements with those third-party vendors. I work with a lot of those vendors right now. as the cloud architect at SOCOM, and I do find that there's a communications gap between the commercial sector and the DoD sector in the language that we're asking for. Sometimes it doesn't make sense in the way that it's being asked. These 800-53 controls that they're referencing a large portion of the CMMC off of are very common to folks like myself who do these in RMF packets and build up the risk management framework packages that get authorities to operate for the DoD. So if you're processing, controlled unclassified information, CUI, that's regulated under the DoD instruction 5200.40 that just recently came out a new version of in March 6th of this year, you're going to want to look at that, and you're going to want to find out what are we talking about when we talk about controlled unclassified information, and then talk with, if you have an existing contract, or if you don't, ask those in the RFPs, those questions in the RFP. Is this material going to be controlled unclassified information? And what about it, what portion of it is going to be CUI? A lot of companies that I've spoken with already are interested in segmenting off that CUI component that they have to deal with the DoD instead of incorporating it throughout their entire network, which would be maybe cost prohibitive, right? And unnecessary under the CMMC guidelines. It's only for the portions of the infrastructure that are touching CUI. The policies and procedures, however, those practices still need to resonate throughout the entire organization, though. So there's a difference between the technical controls and the practices in the CMMC, and I think it's very important that we have the discussion about it. And if Ty is still on, I'd like to ask how you kind of reconcile that those practices.
Unfortunately, Nick, he's not. Okay. He had to leave. I really wanted you to be able to ask him questions, and we will absolutely follow up with him. But if you want to, ask your question now, but I also, as a part of, I wanted to get to a point where we would do some fast questions across each of you. And so you're leading it the right way, which is, what is it that you would like to see from the CMMC advisory board, right? That you haven't heard or seen to date. But finish your question to him, we will get it to him, and then also then start this round of, pick one thing that you'd like to see coming out of the advisory board.
Sure. So to complete the question that I was going to pose to Ty, it's in reference to those practices. So you have 17 practices that you have to follow for CMMC, and then you have all of these controls that help you with those practices, and reconciling those practices and how somebody does a process or an action or a report or documentation or a response effort or a monitoring effort versus the technical controls that need to be in place. Those practices, I'm assuming, need to be throughout the entire organization, or can it just be a subsection of that division that's working on a contract that's with the DoD?
That's a great question, and I took it. And we will circle back with him, copy everybody. Okay, and then real quick, anything else you'd like to see from the advisory board?
I guess if there was a guide that they could put together for how to communicate the requirements from the practices and the 8570 controls, excuse me, not 8570, the 800-53 controls with those contracted or commercial vendors, so that they have a common lexicon. So when we say this, we mean this.
Yep, I love it. Thank you. Guy, to you. What would you like to see? If you were going to get one thing from the CMMC advisory board, what would you like to see?
Well, I'm going to dovetail something Nick said. I think it's really important, especially for the smaller businesses, that they get some guidance on how to have a conversation with their MSP, their service provider, and what requirements, what are they going to require before they can, be confident that provider can give them the proper service. Because there's a lot of MSPs out there that have no experience in DoD controls, right? And it's a different process. And so, some of those providers will probably ramp up to this. They may have special divisions, but that's what I hear in the smaller members of the DIB community, the ones that are subprimes that may do one or two things But DoD is their contract. That's their business, and they're very concerned because they don't have their own IT people. They can't afford them. There's really no reason to do that. So having guidance on how to have that conversation. The same thing has come up with the SBDC. We're talking to them about how to have that conversation with an entrepreneur who might be a 1 or 2 person shop. They're not doing their own IT work. They don't care. They want it to work, right? So we're seeing the same thing happen in the civilian sector as well. It's a common problem.
Great. Dan, what do you want to see from the CMMC advisory board?
If I could redo my kind of rambling question that I asked Ty when he was still on the phone, you mean?
Or if there's something else, there's something else that you.
There's a lot else, right? I mean, I saw an article about the NSA piloting an MSP program they would fund for the defense industrial base to achieve this level of compliance. I assume, above level 3, right? Because that's when you start needing the monitoring and really making an investment. And that's, to Guy's point and Nick's point, the MSP model is so popular with SMBs because you can't do 24. It costs millions of dollars to stand up a SOC, right? It's just cost prohibitive. So the MSP model, but really this. It's a way to consume the services and become compliant, but it's great points that those MSPs largely aren't focused on these issues and they don't speak DoD. So there's a lot of pitfalls there for sure, but there's a lot of pitfalls and some serious conversations I think that I'd like to hear the AB address about should the NSA be providing these services. It's some more philosophical questions about how this is going to be implemented, where the money flows is, as a business owner, always a huge factor for us, right? Is this financial side of things, the investment, and what is allowable, and that's only applicable to certain contract types, right? Where you have allowable expenses. There's a lot of the defense industrial base who do not contract. Everything's assumed in overhead, and you operate on certain margins, so it just becomes a cost of business for everybody. That's okay.
Right.
But there's a lot of other models that aren't.
Take it to the next level of what you're saying, which is how could they develop an MS, a small mid-sized business version where they are outsourcing, right, their IT today. In other words, right now, right, the whole controls and mapping honestly are set up in a way for a sophisticated cyber organization. If you don't know how to spell cyber, that's why it's overwhelming. So should there be a mapping, right? And maybe this gets a little bit to Nick's perspective as well, right? Should there, the guide, the lexicon, the mapping for small to mid-sized businesses, or the way I say that is they don't have CIOs, they don't have CISOs, right? They don't, and all that goes with that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's hundreds of employees. You can have hundreds of employees and still qualify as this small business who an MSP is a no-brainer for, right? But I think that what we should almost have is a split in the MSP market between the commercial sector and those supporting the Department of Defense to become CMMC compliant. So we've got MSPs that receive the CMMC high-level certification, and if you are working with these companies that are certified, then the liability can kind of flow downhill to that MSP to take responsibility, since that is their business model. And the small businesses who do not operate a cybersecurity company can focus on their value to the government and still be compliant with CMMC. I think that would be a good outcome for everybody in that space.
Okay, no, that makes a lot.
Ron, let me just interrupt and note the time. We've got about 7 minutes or so to go, and I'll remind folks on the line, if you've got questions, please submit them. Otherwise, Terry and company, keep talking.
Okay, since we only have a few more minutes, and Nick, we didn't have you in up front, so I want to make sure that you get a chance to talk some more. If you were to tell companies or government folks, what are the initial steps to adoption, both on the RFP contracting side, right? And on the solution response side of things, or take it any direction you want.
Is that directed towards me?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I forgot to mention that I am the small business chair of the Tampa St. Pete chapter. So that's why I kind of key in on their requirements. And we, DoD wants to work with more of those small and smaller startups or businesses that are moving fast and innovative. There's a balance there, obviously, that you have to find that is security and how fast you can move, right, or innovate. And we're finding that with the AI task force and the developers we're working with DevSecOps. There are solutions out there already, or marketplaces such as FedRAMP that do have high baselines, medium baselines, and low baselines. And those are called information impact levels, or IL levels. And I won't, try and derail this down to the FedRAMP discussion, but there are 3 PAOs already out there that do authorize vendors out there for CUI or non-CUI or FOUO. Areas or services. And so if you were talking, for instance, for a cloud provider, AWS or Azure or IBM or Oracle, there's a lot of them out there. If you go to the FedRAMP marketplace, you will find a FedRAMP high baseline. And what that means is it is authorized for up to CUI. So if you see something that is already up to CUI, you can consume that service, and that will ensure at least some compliance level with FedRAMP. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion in Cmmc, and I've seen it on LinkedIn and other forums where they're discussing it, is what does that alignment look like, or mapping look like to the FedRAMP alignment? Because a lot of those are overlapping. So
Okay.
if we could get to a certain type of this meets this criteria for Cmmc to the FedRAMP, it would be very helpful, I think, for the small businesses to consume those SaaS offerings or services that are hosted out of those regions for those vendors that are approved.
That's a great idea. I like it. Okay, Guy, your overall recommendation for initial steps to adoption, or any final thoughts?
I think the first thing that people need to do is find out what it really means to them. And so this is where hopefully those of us in the education and training world can start working on some awareness programs so people can get familiarity with what's required at the different levels, find out how they would know what level they're supposed to be at. Some of these basic questions that are on everybody's mind, especially the smaller entrepreneurs. So I think if we can, in the initial steps, help with letting them define the problem, then it gets a lot easier to create and map to solutions, even like what Nick was talking about with these different providers like AWS, and some of these people already have things in place that would be necessary to carry the work that may or may not be appropriate. So I think the first step is let's define the problem, what's the challenge, help businesses do that, and once they can do that, then they can start seeking solutions.
Guy, have you seen, is there outreach to the cyber-based programs at the universities at all from OSD, CIO, or from CMMC on this?
We haven't had direct conversations with CMMC until today, talking with Ty and these folks, but the DEO office here in our state, one of our economic organizations, has been working with Cyber Florida and the Center for Cybersecurity at University of West Florida on trying to develop something along these lines. So there are things moving through the machinery right now. This particular webinar is the first step in that direction, but that is definitely something we're trying to get moving in the state of Florida right now.
Okay. Dan, was it you who brought up about the NSA piloting?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so circle back on that, because I think I didn't get, are you for it? Or are you against it? What do you want to see?
So yeah, I can elaborate or try to be very concise on that. I think that an alternative to the government offering and competing against the commercial sector, who comprise these MSPs, right? Those are themselves small businesses most often who are offering services, and they just happen to offer cybersecurity services and manage these tools for folks. So I would hate to see more government overstepping into a competitive environment with those companies.
Government proprietary approaches kind of thing.
But to Guy and Nick and everybody's point here, this is a unique situation, and those MSPs serve both commercial customers who have different types of customers, right? So I do think that the MSP should be held, and I think that a lot of our cybersecurity issues deal around liability, and I think that if the accountability was at the MSP to a degree, it would make this a much more attainable thing for the SMBs, and which is a completely different scenario than the large enterprise primes who have their own internal staffs and are working towards those higher level CMMC certifications. They already have many of the processes and practices in place, because a lot of this isn't new. So I don't think it's that big of a shock to the system, to the DIB as we think it is. It's just the devil's in the details, and it's a good thing, but I certainly don't want to see federal agencies offering services that I think should be offered by the commercial space.
Okay, and you as a cyber savvy small business yourself, what are the initial steps that you're taking?
Oh, I mean the basic. So I mean, what is a control is something that mitigates risk, right? Any action that mitigates risk, right? So it's everything from the documenting the policies, right? Again, it's really just a couple lines that you have to document a policy when you're a small business. The scale is where things get complex, right? And you have to start adding additional, controls to mitigate your additional risk, both in users and endpoints, and just the size of the target on your back. So as an organization matures, you have to be very strategic and intentional about how you tack on these additional processes and try to keep the tools and the technology spread under control at the same time, because you've got to afford the OpEx that this is costing you. So there's a lot of factors that go into running a business as it grows, and again, scale is where the complexity comes, but you need to do more to protect a larger organization, right? So wherever people are on the journey, it's about awareness of where your threats are coming from, and what risk you're facing, and what risk you're willing to accept. So that's my closing comments or thoughts on for owners of companies any size, right?
Yes, absolutely. Nick.
So Terry and panel, Terry, Mike's given you and I his proxy for closing remarks, so I will yield the floor to you. I have a few things to say, but if you'll provide sort of the penultimate closing, we'll get everybody out of here on time, and thank the panel. So over to you.
So I want to take some of the great ideas I think that were discussed today, both with Ty and with the panelists. I really like the idea of a guide and lexicon, and maybe there are different versions of it, right? For the sophisticated large enterprises, and then for folks who don't have CIOs and CISOs, and maybe for the different levels even. Having been a CMMI practitioner, I know that we can make it too heavy sometimes, and we might need these lighter weight versions for companies that need to get to level 1, 2, 3, vice 4 and 5. The other thing is, I think we want to leverage, amazing groups like AFCEA, and many of us are also members of INSA. In other words, I think figuring out ways where we can do some showcasing of capabilities, some of that partnership with the university on getting some of the materials out for folks and the exposure. And then finally with the universities, I must admit I'm a little dismayed that there isn't a systematic approach for reaching out to the cyber centers at the universities. And I think that's something that we might want to follow up with Ty on, how to enable some of the outreach using the professional associations that support the DIB. and the universities that can create some of the awareness and training and education programs. So I'd like us to put together some of those homework assignments and use this as a great jumping off point to do that work. So over to you. Thank you so much, panelists. You were excellent, and I love the different perspectives. And Nick, we're just really happy that we got you back, because I felt a hole until you were able to jump back in. So Ron, back to you.
Great, thanks, Terry. And on behalf of Mike McConnell, let me echo Terry's appreciation. Thank you, panelists, for doing this. We got some great insight. Let me remind our audience, some of you submitted questions. We'll answer every question we get. We'll have to do that online since we've run out of time on the webinar, but you'll get an answer. Secondly, there are lots of documents on the Cyber Florida website, as well as the websites of the board and the CMMC folks and OSD as well. So there's, if anything, there's a plethora of material out there, and I think the key is going to be to sort through it. I think we got some great ideas in that regard. Next steps. I will tell you there will be next steps. I wish I could tell you what they are, but we've considered today's webinar phase 1, and there will be phase 2. As Guy suggested, we're talking with the state's Department of Economic Opportunity. They've got a grant from the Defense Department to do what we've all been talking about, and that is aid small and medium-sized businesses in getting certified. Guy, I'll warn you, I'm talking to you and your boss in about a half an hour about other things we could do. So there will be more to come. Dan and I are unindicted co-conspirators. We've been conspiring about the role that he and AFCEA can play as well. So stay tuned. Come back to this space. We will outline what phase 2 will look like, because we know that there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that all of you aren't so daunted by this particular requirement. One thing I'll add, if I understood correctly, one of the things that Ty told us is that either he and or DOD will have to go through some rulemaking to incorporate this into the defense acquisition regulations. And one role that we could play collectively, and potentially with Cyber Florida and others as the voice, is to comment on those regulations. There will be a public comment period. And as in most things, if individuals offer comments, they carry weight, but there will be a lot of them. If an organization representing lots of individuals provides those same comments, it may carry more weight. So that's something we should all think about and potentially make suggestions about. In closing, again, panelists, thanks. If you have any ideas, send them to us. Audience, thank you for your time and attention. If you have ideas on how Cyber Florida can be helpful in this, again, by all means, send them in. There will be a phase 2, so stay tuned. And with that, thanks everybody, and look forward to our next webinar. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ron.
Take care. Be safe.